Homelessness is skyrocketing in the world's wealthiest nations. A family sleeps by Buckingham Palace, a PhD searches for food in LA, and Paris is littered with tension. Why is this happening? Join Eagle Discovery to uncover the truth behind the growing crisis. The crisis in the UK. Stay with me. The answer is on its way. What if I told you that one of the wealthiest nations on Earth also leads the world in homelessness rates? In 2023, the UK experienced an alarming surge in homelessness, reaching its highest level ever. Over 10,510 people were officially listed as homeless, an unprecedented figure. Yet the true scale of the problem is even more devastating. More than 1 in every 200 households are now living in precarious situations, such as temporary shelters, makeshift accommodations, or even on the streets. London, the UK's capital and a global emblem of wealth, stands at the heart of this crisis. For every 58 people in London, 1 is homeless. This statistic starkly exposes the deep divide between affluence and poverty. Housing affordability is a major factor driving homelessness in the UK. In cities like London, skyrocketing rent prices have pushed many beyond their limits. Picture a cafe worker earning £1,200 a month, while the average cost of renting a modest flat in London reaches £22,000 annually. The numbers simply don't add up. Cuts to housing benefits and reduced social services have only worsened the situation for many low-income families. These benefits were once a critical safety net, and without them, eviction becomes an inevitable and grim reality. Policies intended to protect vulnerable groups are failing them. For those who lose their homes, the consequences are more than just discomfort. They become life-threatening. Many are forced into overcrowded, unsanitary temporary housing, where poor conditions and lack of hygiene pose severe health hazards. Nearly a third of homeless individuals in the UK suffer due to inadequate medical care. In the face of this crisis, some organizations are creatively raising awareness. The Homelessness Reframed exhibition at the Saatchi Art Gallery features artwork created by or inspired by homeless people. Additionally, Matt and Jess Turtle have founded the world's first museum dedicated to homelessness, providing a platform for stories that often go unnoticed. The United States, the superpower grappling with homelessness. If the UK is struggling with homelessness, what about the world's superpower? Before we dive into the next issue, take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. There's plenty more engaging content coming your way. Now, let's focus on the United States. The United States, the wealthiest nation in the world, has over 500,000 people sleeping without a roof every night. How can this happen in a country that allocates trillions to innovation and defense? The reasons may surprise you. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, in 2024, about 582,460 individuals experienced homelessness on a single night. Of these, 77,400 are chronically homeless, meaning they've been living without stable shelter for a year or more. In cities such as Los Angeles, New York, and San Francisco, the crisis is visible to everyone. Streets and blocks are lined with makeshift shelters, tent cities spread under highways and in public parks, altering urban landscapes in ways that are hard to ignore. Housing in the U.S. is incredibly expensive, sometimes beyond imagination. In 2024, the national median rent soared to $2,530 per month, far outpacing wage growth. In places like San Francisco, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment exceeds $3,000 monthly. Many Americans simply cannot afford to keep up. Homelessness is not just an economic issue. It's closely linked to mental health and addiction. A 2024 report from the National Alliance to End Homelessness found that 25% of those living unsheltered suffer from severe mental illness, while 38% struggle with substance use disorders. Without affordable health care, addressing these issues becomes nearly impossible. For many, life on the streets is fraught with danger. Some seek shelter in abandoned buildings or vehicles, while others turn to highway underpasses and tunnels. In Los Angeles alone, over 1,500 people reside in the city's sewer system. In response to this crisis, some individuals and groups have developed unconventional solutions. Take Slab City, also known as Freedom Town, a remote desert community where the homeless, veterans, and others live without electricity or water, but experience a sense of freedom and community. There's also the story of Dr. Daniel Moon, a former astronomy lecturer at UCLA earning $70,000 annually. Despite his stable income, Daniel couldn't afford to live in Los Angeles due to soaring rent prices. "I was forced to live out of my car for months," he recalls. "It's ironic. I spent years studying the stars, but ended up sleeping under them." His story serves as a stark reminder of how even professionals can find themselves on the brink of homelessness. The struggle in France. Dear friends, if you've made it this far, you might already feel that having basic necessities like food, water, or even just a place to call home is a true blessing. If you agree, leave a comment below. From a global superpower to a land marked by stark inequalities, let's now take a closer look at how even a city as stunning as Paris harbors a darker reality. Stay with us. In France, around 333,000 people are homeless, and the capital is no exception. In Paris, approximately 16.1% of residents, around 463,000 individuals, live below the poverty line, struggling to survive on an average monthly income of just $747, or about $800. This isn't merely a statistic, it's a human reality, and the numbers are only growing. What's driving this hidden hardship? Economic inequality is a major factor. While tourists flock to the glamorous Champs-Élysées, many Parisians are battling to make ends meet. Escalating living costs, coupled with stagnant wages, are pushing families to the edge, making them vulnerable to homelessness. Housing instability is another key issue. Losing a home is unfortunately all too common in France. One unique challenge here is squatting, where abandoned properties are illegally occupied by people without shelter. Disturbingly, French law often offers more protection to squatters than to homeowners, leaving the displaced struggling for viable solutions. For those without homes, life becomes unimaginably brutal. Many sleep on cardboard mats under overpasses or along the banks of the St. Martin Canal, surrounded by piles of garbage. Others seek shelter in crowded subway stations, huddling together for warmth during the cold winter months. In the face of this crisis, nonprofits are stepping in to provide help. Mobile shower units and laundry services restore dignity to those living on the streets. Charities offer free meals, haircuts, and medical care, while volunteers distribute blankets and supplies. It's a lifeline for many. But is it enough? Now it's your turn. Have you witnessed similar struggles in your own city or country? Share your thoughts in the comments below. China's hidden homelessness crisis. France isn't the only country grappling with hidden homelessness. Let's travel to Asia, where a growing economic giant faces its own serious issue. While China's homelessness crisis may not make as many headlines as those in other nations, the numbers are shocking. Around 2.5 million people across the country are homeless, and in cities like Hong Kong, real estate prices are among the highest globally. The cost of purchasing a modest apartment can exceed $1.2 million, and renting even a basic space is out of reach for many. In Hong Kong, homelessness takes on distinctive forms. One of the most notable is the rise of refugees. Nearly 25% of the city's homeless population spends their nights inside McDonald's restaurants, attracted by the air conditioning, security, and the semblance of normalcy. Another troubling phenomenon is the prevalence of coffin homes, tiny, cramped apartments no larger than a parking space. These tiny units, often poorly ventilated and overcrowded, can cost as much as $500 per month to rent. For many, it's a heartbreaking compromise between living on the streets and having some semblance of shelter. Homeless individuals in China have also come up with innovative ways to survive. Some live stream under bridges, performing songs, or sharing their personal struggles to earn small donations from viewers. Others have adopted unconventional begging strategies, asking for funds not only for food, but for unexpected requests like travel. Take Mr. Enon Van's son, for example. Once a construction worker in Hong Kong, he lost his job after an injury and, unable to afford rent, ended up living under a pedestrian bridge in Sham Shui Po. The city has grown wealthier, he reflects, but people like me are forgotten. Then there's Ta Duong, a once promising academic who graduated from a prestigious university and earned a PhD. Despite his qualifications, he spent the last 14 years homeless, struggling with mental health issues and unable to reconnect with his family. He now scavenges for food and sleeps under a bridge. Success felt so close, he remembers, but everything slipped away. Lastly, there's Mrs. Ivy, an elderly woman who refuses to live in a coffin home. "I'd rather sleep in the park than feel like I'm locked in a box," she says. Each night she guards her few belongings carefully, keeping her phone and wallet close. For Ivy, the streets offer more freedom than the confined, unsafe housing many like her endure. South Korea's hidden homeless struggle. South Korea, renowned for its advanced technology, K-pop, and rapid economic growth, faces an unexpected issue: homelessness. With around 11,000 homeless individuals in a population of 51.7 million, how can such a prosperous modern society leave so many behind? For a country celebrated for its development, the presence of thousands of homeless people exposes cracks in its urban and social systems. One major challenge is the soaring housing costs. Real estate prices in South Korea, especially in Seoul, have skyrocketed, pushing affordable housing beyond the reach of many. The average cost of an apartment in Seoul exceeds $1 million, making homeownership impossible for low-income earners. Alcohol abuse also plays a significant role in the homelessness issue. South Korea has one of the highest rates of alcohol consumption globally, and many homeless individuals spend a large portion of their limited income on alcohol, deepening their poverty cycle. The country's harsh winters add another layer of danger. Temperatures often drop well below freezing, and the frigid conditions combined with the cold ground make sleeping outdoors life-threatening. While some seek warmth in underground heating systems near subway stations, many are unable to escape the bitter cold. Just 20 minutes away from Gangnam, one of Seoul's wealthiest neighborhoods, lies the Gyereong slum. There, makeshift homes built from scrap materials struggle to withstand the elements, and coal fires used for warmth often result in devastating fires. In a desperate search for stability, some women, especially Vietnamese immigrants, turn to fake marriages. Brokers offer a way out of homelessness in exchange for money or favors, but these arrangements often lead to exploitation and further hardship. Despite these difficulties, organizations such as Dream City Center and Myeongdong Church are making a difference. Dream City Center provides housing, medical checkups, laundry services, and even haircuts to hundreds of people each day. Meanwhile, Myeongdong Church offers over 800 free meals every week, offering vital support to both the homeless and elderly. Hyun's story exemplifies quiet resilience. After enduring bullying in a women's homeless shelter, she sought refuge under Yeongang Bridge. For 5 years, she lived in a tent, surviving on small donations from strangers. "I never imagined my life would turn out this way," she says. "But at least there I have some control." The homeless crisis in Canada. What would you do if the very roof over your head became unaffordable? Homelessness in Canada affects around 235,000 people every year, with over 35,000 individuals without a home on any given night. While cities like Toronto and Vancouver thrive as economic centers, they also bear the weight of this crisis. In Toronto alone, more than 10,000 people use emergency shelters annually, with many others left without shelter. Canada's real estate market is among the least affordable in the world. In the last 20 years, property prices in cities like Vancouver and Toronto have surged by over 300%. Renting is also becoming increasingly difficult, with the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Toronto surpassing $2,500 per month in 2024. For minimum wage workers, These costs are simply unattainable. Despite the growing demand for housing, Canada's public housing system has failed to meet needs since the 1990s. Government investment in social housing has diminished, leaving low-income families to wait for years on lengthy waiting lists. This shortage pushes many into temporary or unsafe living conditions. Canada's brutal winters further exacerbate the struggles of homelessness, with temperatures regularly dropping below -20 degrees Celsius, making outdoor living life-threatening. Emergency shelters often reach full capacity, leaving many to face the freezing cold without any option of refuge. In response, both the government and nonprofit organizations are taking action. The federal government's National Housing Strategy aims to build 100,000 affordable housing units by 2030. At the same time, NGOs such as Raising the Roof provide emergency shelters, transitional housing, and job training to help individuals regain independence. While these efforts are important, some critics argue that they don't fully address the systemic issues that drive homelessness in Canada. In the winter, you can't just survive. You have to fight to stay alive, says David, a former construction worker who has spent the past 3 years in a Toronto shelter. You can't sleep because you're too cold, and you can't leave because you have nowhere else to go. Canada's homelessness crisis highlights the profound effects of housing inequality and systemic barriers. But what about the challenges faced in other parts of the world? Homelessness in Australia, a unique crisis. After exploring the cold streets of Canada, let's move to the Southern Hemisphere to understand how Australia's distinct challenges shape its homelessness crisis. Homelessness in Australia has reached alarming levels. According to recent reports, over 116,000 people are without stable housing each night. This includes families living in cars, individuals in overcrowded shelters, and entire communities struggling in urban tent cities. Indigenous Australians are disproportionately affected, making up nearly 20% of the homeless population, even though they represent only 3.2% of the overall population. This stark imbalance raises urgent questions about systemic inequalities. Australia's real estate market is one of the most expensive in the world. In cities like Sydney and Melbourne, median house prices exceed $1 million, and rental costs are escalating. For low-income families and individuals, securing even a modest apartment has become nearly impossible. Government investment in public housing has stagnated for decades, resulting in a shortfall of 400,000 affordable units. Waiting lists for social housing can extend for years. This chronic underinvestment has left vulnerable populations with nowhere to turn. Indigenous Australians face a unique and devastating set of challenges. Generations of systemic inequalities in education, employment, and healthcare have led to higher rates of homelessness. For many, finding stable housing is a constant struggle, further complicated by racial discrimination and insufficient support services. In cities like Sydney and Melbourne, homelessness is increasingly visible. Tent cities have become a bleak part of the urban landscape, while overcrowded shelters fail to meet demand. For countless individuals, the streets are their only option. Efforts to combat homelessness in Australia involve both government initiatives and nonprofit programs. The National Housing and Homelessness Agreement allocates $1.6 billion annually to provide emergency shelters and build affordable housing. Organizations like Mission Australia and the Salvation Army run shelters, offer counseling, and provide employment services to help individuals get back on their feet. While these efforts are admirable, experts argue that a more substantial investment in long-term housing solutions is needed to break the cycle of homelessness once and for all. Homelessness is a growing crisis in even the wealthiest nations, driven by rising housing costs and deep inequalities. But hope exists through the efforts of organizations and individuals working to make a difference. Let's keep raising awareness and striving for solutions. Stay with Eagle Discovery for more eye-opening stories.